Fyodor Dostoevsky, an honest thief. One morning, just as I was about to set off to my office, Agrafena, my cook, washerwoman, and housekeeper, came in to me and, to my surprise, entered into conversation. She had always been such a silent, simple creature that, except her daily inquiry about dinner, she had not uttered a word for the last 6 years. I, at least, had heard nothing else from her. "Here I have come in to have a word with you, sir," she began abruptly. "You really ought to let the little room." "Which little room?" "Why, the one next the kitchen, to be sure." "What for?" "What for? Why, because folks do take in lodgers, to be sure." "But who would take it?" "Who would take it?" "Why, a lodger would take it, to be sure." "But, my good woman, one could not put a bedstead in it. There wouldn't be room to move. Who could live in it?" "Who wants to live there, as long as he has a place to sleep in? Why, he would live in the window." "In what window?" "In what window? As though you didn't know. The one in the passage, to be sure. He would sit there, sewing or doing anything else. Maybe he would sit on a chair, too. He's got a chair, and he has a table, too. He's got everything." "Who is he, then?" "Oh, a good man, a man of experience. I will cook for him, and I'll ask him 3 rubles a month for his board and lodging." After prolonged efforts, I succeeded at last in learning from Agrafena that an elderly man had somehow managed to persuade her to admit him into the kitchen as a lodger and boarder. Any notion Agrafena took into her head had to be carried out. If not, I knew she would give me no peace. When anything was not to her liking, she at once began to brood, and sank into a deep dejection that would last for a fortnight or 3 weeks. During that period my dinners were spoiled, my linen was mislaid, my floors went unscrubbed. In short, I had a great deal to put up with. I had observed long ago that this inarticulate woman was incapable of conceiving a project, of originating an idea of her own. But if anything like a notion or a project was by some means put into her feeble brain, to prevent its being carried out meant, for a time, her moral assassination. And so, as I cared more for my peace of mind than for anything else, I consented forthwith. "Has he a passport anyway, or something of the sort?" "To be sure he has. He is a good man, a man of experience. 3 rubles he's promised to pay." The very next day the new lodger made his appearance in my modest bachelor quarters, but I was not put out by this. Indeed, I was inwardly pleased. I led as a rule a very lonely hermit's existence. I have scarcely any friends. I hardly ever go anywhere. As I had spent 10 years never coming out of my shell, I had, of course, grown used to solitude. But another 10 or 15 years or more of the same solitary existence, with the same Agrafena, in the same bachelor quarters, was in truth a somewhat cheerless prospect. And therefore a new inmate, if well behaved, was a heaven-sent blessing. Agrafena had spoken truly. My lodger was certainly a man of experience. From his passport it appeared that he was an old soldier, a fact which I should have known indeed from his face. An old soldier is easily recognized. Astafy Ivanovitch was a favorable specimen of his class. We got on very well together. What was best of all, Astafy Ivanovitch would sometimes tell a story, describing some incident in his own life. In the perpetual boredom of my existence, such a storyteller was a veritable treasure. One day he told me one of these stories. It made an impression on me. The following event was what led to it. I was left alone in the flat. Both Astafy and Agrafena were out on business of their own. All of a sudden, I heard from the inner room, somebody, I fancied a stranger, "Come in." I went out. There actually was a stranger in the passage, a short fellow wearing no overcoat in spite of the cold autumn weather. "What do you want?" "Does a clerk called Alexandrov live here?" "Nobody of that name here, brother. Goodbye." "Why, the dvornik told me it was here," said my visitor, cautiously retiring towards the door. Be off. Be off, brother. Get along. Next day after dinner, while Astafy Ivanovitch was fitting on a coat which he was altering for me, again someone came into the passage. I half opened the door. Before my very eyes, my yesterday's visitor, with perfect composure, took my wadded greatcoat from the peg and, stuffing it under his arm, darted out of the flat. Agrafena stood all the time staring at him, agape with astonishment and doing nothing for the protection of my property. Astafy Ivanovitch flew in pursuit of the thief, and 10 minutes later came back out of breath and empty-handed. He had vanished completely. "Well, there's a piece of luck, Astafy Ivanovitch. It's a good job your cloak is left, or he would have put you in a plight, the thief." But the whole incident had so impressed Astafy Ivanovitch that I forgot the theft as I looked at him. He could not get over it. Every minute or two, he would drop the work upon which he was engaged, and would describe over again how it had all happened, how he had been standing, how the greatcoat had been taken down before his very eyes, not a yard away, and how it had come to pass that he could not catch the thief. Then he would sit down to his work again, then leave it once more, and at last I saw him go down to the dvornik to tell him all about it, and to upbraid him for letting such a thing happen in his domain. Then he came back, and began scolding Agrafena. Then he sat down to his work again, and long afterwards he was still muttering to himself how it had all happened, how he stood there and I was here, how before our eyes, not a yard away, the thief took the coat off the peg, and so on. In short, though Astafy Ivanovitch understood his business, he was a terrible slow-coach and busybody. "He's made fools of us, Astafy Ivanovitch," I said to him in the evening, as I gave him a glass of tea. I wanted to while away the time by recalling the story of the lost greatcoat, the frequent repetition of which, together with the great earnestness of the speaker, was beginning to become very amusing. "Fools indeed, sir. Even though it is no business of mine, I am put out. It makes me angry, though it is not my coat that was lost. To my thinking, there is no vermin in the world worse than a thief. Another takes what you can spare, but a thief steals the work of your hands, the sweat of your brow, your time. Ugh, it's nasty. One can't speak of it. It's too vexing. How is it you don't feel the loss of your property, sir?" "Yes, you are right, Astafy Ivanovitch. Better if the thing had been burnt. It's annoying to let the thief have it. It's disagreeable." "Disagreeable? I should think so. Yet, to be sure, there are thieves and thieves, and I have happened, sir, to come across an honest thief." "An honest thief? But how can a thief be honest, Astafy Ivanovitch?" "There you are right indeed, sir. How can a thief be honest? There are none such. I only meant to say that he was an honest man, sure enough, and yet he stole. I was simply sorry for him." "Why, how was that, Astafy Ivanovitch?" "It was about 2 years ago, sir. I had been nearly a year out of a place, and just before I lost my place, I made the acquaintance of a poor lost creature. We got acquainted in a public house. He was a drunkard, a vagrant, a beggar. He had been in a situation of some sort, but from his drinking habits, he had lost his work. Such a ne'er-do-weel. God only knows what he had on. Often you wouldn't be sure if he'd a shirt under his coat. Everything he could lay his hands upon, he would drink away. But he was not one to quarrel. He was a quiet fellow, a soft, good-natured chap. And he'd never ask. He was ashamed. But you could see for yourself the poor fellow wanted a drink, and you would stand it him. And so we got friendly. That's to say, he stuck to me. It was all one to me. And what a man he was, to be sure. Like a little dog he would follow me. Wherever I went, there he would be. And all that after our first meeting, and he as thin as a thread paper. At first it was, let me stay the night. Well, I let him stay. I looked at his passport too. The man was all right. Well, the next day it was the same story, and then the third day he came again and sat all day in the window and stayed the night. Well, thinks I. He is sticking to me. Give him food and drink and shelter at night too. Here am I, a poor man, and a hanger-on to keep as well. And before he came to me, he used to go in the same way to a government clerk's. He attached himself to him. They were always drinking together. But he, through trouble of some sort, drank himself into the grave. My man was called Emelian Ilyich. I pondered and pondered what I was to do with him. To drive him away, I was ashamed. I was sorry for him. Such a pitiful, God-forsaken creature I never did set eyes on. And not a word said either. He does not ask, but just sits there and looks into your eyes like a dog. To think what drinking will bring a man down to. I keep asking myself, how am I to say to him, "You must be moving, Emelianushka. There's nothing for you here. You've come to the wrong place. I shall soon not have a bite for myself. How am I to keep you too?" I sat and wondered what he'd do when I said that to him. And I seemed to see how he'd stare at me. If he were to hear me say that, how long he would sit and not understand a word of it. And when it did get home to him at last, how he would get up from the window, would take up his bundle. I can see it now. The red check handkerchief full of holes, with God knows what wrapped up in it, which he had always with him, and then how he would set his shabby old coat to rights, so that it would look decent and keep him warm, so that no holes would be seen. He was a man of delicate feelings. And how he'd open the door and go out with tears in his eyes. Well, there's no letting a man go to ruin like that. One's sorry for him. And then again I think, how am I off myself? Wait a bit, Emelianushka, says I to myself. You've not long to feast with me. I shall soon be going away, and then you will not find me. Well, sir, our family made a move, and Alexander Filimonovich, my master, now deceased, God rest his soul, said, "I am thoroughly satisfied with you, Astafy Ivanovich. When we come back from the country, we will take you on again." I had been butler with them. A nice gentleman he was, but he died that same year. Well, after seeing him off, I took my belongings, what little money I had, and I thought I'd have a rest for a time, so I went to an old woman I knew, and I took a corner in her room. There was only one corner free in it. She had been a nurse, so now she had a pension and a room of her own. Well, now goodbye, Emelianushka, thinks I. You won't find me now, my boy. And what do you think, sir? I had gone out to see a man I knew, and when I came back in the evening, the first thing I saw was Emelianushka. There he was, sitting on my box and his check bundle beside him. He was sitting in his ragged old coat, waiting for me. And to while away the time he had borrowed a church book from the old lady and was holding it wrong side upwards. He'd scented me out. My heart sank. Well, thinks I, there's no help for it. Why didn't I turn him out at first? So I asked him straight off, "Have you brought your passport, Emelianushka?" I sat down on the spot, sir, and began to ponder. Will a vagabond like that be very much trouble to me? And on thinking it over, it seemed he would not be much trouble. He must be fed, I thought. Well, a bit of bread in the morning, and to make it go down better, I'll buy him an onion. At midday, I should have to give him another bit of bread and an onion. And in the evening, onion again with kvass, with some more bread if he wanted it. And if some cabbage soup were to come our way, then we should both have had our fill. I am no great eater myself, and a drinking man, as we all know, never eats. All he wants is herb brandy or green vodka. He'll ruin me with his drinking, I thought, but then another idea came into my head, sir, and took great hold on me. So much so that if Emelianushka had gone away, I should have felt that I had nothing to live for, I do believe. I determined on the spot to be a father and guardian to him. I'll keep him. From ruin, I thought. I'll wean him from the glass. You wait a bit, thought I. Very well, Emelianushka, you may stay, only you must behave yourself. You must obey orders. Well, thinks I to myself, I'll begin by training him to work of some sort, but not all at once. Let him enjoy himself a little first, and I'll look round and find something you are fit for, Emelianushka. For every sort of work a man needs a special ability, you know, sir. And I began to watch him on the quiet. I soon saw Emelianushka was a desperate character. I began, sir, with a word of advice. I said this and that to him. Emelianushka, said I, you ought to take a thought and mend your ways. Have done with drinking. Just look what rags you go about in. That old coat of yours, if I may make bold to say so, is fit for nothing but a sieve. A pretty state of things. It's time to draw the line, sure enough. Emelianushka sat and listened to me, with his head hanging down. Would you believe it, sir? It had come to such a pass with him. He'd lost his tongue through drink and could not speak a word of sense. Talk to him of cucumbers and he'd answer back about beans. He would listen and listen to me, and then heave such a sigh. What are you sighing for, Emelian Ilyitch? I asked him. Oh, nothing. Don't you mind me, Astafy Ivanovitch. Do you know there were 2 women fighting in the street today, Astafy Ivanovitch? One upset the other woman's basket of cranberries by accident. Well, what of that? And the second one upset the other's cranberries on purpose, and trampled them underfoot too. Well, and what of it, Emelian Ilyitch? Why, nothing, Astafy Ivanovitch. I just mentioned it. Nothing, I just mentioned it. Emelianushka, my boy, I thought, you've squandered and drunk away your brains. And do you know, a gentleman dropped a money note on the pavement in Gorohovy Street. No, it was Sadovy Street. And a peasant saw it and said, that's my luck. And at the same time, another man saw it and said, no, it's my bit of luck. I saw it before you did. Well, Emelian Ilyitch? And the fellows had a fight over it, Astafy Ivanovitch. But a policeman came up, took away the note, gave it back to the gentleman, and threatened to take up both the men. Well, but what of that? What is there edifying about it, Emelianushka? Why, nothing, to be sure. Folks laughed, Astafy Ivanovitch. Ah, Emelianushka, what do the folks matter? You've sold your soul for a brass farthing. But do you know what I have to tell you, Emelian Ilyitch? What? Astafy Ivanovitch. Take a job of some sort. That's what you must do. For the 100th time I say to you, set to work. Have some mercy on yourself. What could I set to, Astafy Ivanovitch? I don't know what job I could set to, and there is no one who will take me on, Astafy Ivanovitch. That's how you came to be turned off, Emelianushka, you drinking man. And do you know Vlas, the waiter, was sent for to the office today, Astafy Ivanovitch? Why did they send for him, Emelianushka? I asked. I could not say why, Astafy Ivanovitch. I suppose they wanted him there, and that's why they sent for him. Ah, thought I, we are in a bad way, poor Emelianushka. The Lord is chastising us for our sins. Well, sir, what is one to do with such a man? But a cunning fellow he was, and no mistake. He'd listen and listen to me, but at last I suppose he got sick of it. As soon as he sees I am beginning to get angry, he'd pick up his old coat, and out he'd slip and leave no trace. He'd wander about all day and come back at night drunk. Where he got the money from, the Lord only knows. I had no hand in that. No, said I. Emelian Ilyitch, you'll come to a bad end. Give over drinking. Mind what I say now. Give it up. Next time you come home in liquor, you can spend the night on the stairs. I won't let you in. After hearing that threat, Emelianushka sat at home that day and the next. But on the third, he slipped off again. I waited and waited. He didn't come back. Well, at least I don't mind owning. I was in a fright, and I felt for the man too. What have I done to him? I thought, I've scared him away. Where's the poor fellow going to now? He'll get lost maybe. Lord have mercy upon us. Night came on. He did not come. In the morning I went out into the porch. I looked, and if he hadn't gone to sleep in the porch, There he was with his head on the step, and chilled to the marrow of his bones. "What next, Emelianushka? God have mercy on you. Where will you get to next?" "Why, you were sort of angry with me, Astafy Ivanovitch. The other day you were vexed and promised to put me to sleep in the porch, so I didn't, sort of, venture to come in, Astafy Ivanovitch, and so I lay down here." "I did feel angry and sorry too. Surely you might undertake some other duty, Emelianushka, instead of lying here guarding the steps," I said. "Why, what other duty, Astafy Ivanovitch?" "You lost soul. I was in such a rage I called him that. If you could but learn tailoring work. Look at your old rag of a coat. It's not enough to have it in tatters. Here you are sweeping the steps with it. You might take a needle and boggle up your rags, as decency demands. Ah, you drunken man. What do you think, sir? He actually did take a needle. Of course I said it in jest, but he was so scared he set to work. He took off his coat and began threading the needle. I watched him. As you may well guess, his eyes were all red and bleary, and his hands were all of a shake. He kept shoving and shoving the thread and could not get it through the eye of the needle. He kept screwing his eyes up and wetting the thread and twisting it in his fingers. It was no good. He gave it up and looked at me. "Well," said I, "this is a nice way to treat me. If there had been folks by to see, I don't know what I should have done." "Why, you simple fellow, I said it you in joke, as a reproach. Give over your nonsense, God bless you. Sit quiet, and don't put me to shame. Don't sleep on my stairs, and make a laughing stock of me." "Why, what am I to do, Astafy Ivanovitch? I know very well I am a drunkard and good for nothing. I can do nothing but vex you, my benefactor." And at that, his blue lips began all of a sudden to quiver, and a tear ran down his white cheek and trembled on his stubbly chin, and then poor Emelianushka burst into a regular flood of tears. Mercy on us! I felt as though a knife were thrust into my heart. The sensitive creature! I'd never have expected it. Who could have guessed it? "No, Emelianushka," thought I shall give you up altogether. You can go your way like the rubbish you are. Well, sir, why make a long story of it? And the whole affair is so trifling. It's not worth wasting words upon. Why, you, for instance, sir, would not have given a thought to it. But I would have given a great deal. If I had a great deal to give, that it never should have happened at all. I had a pair of riding breeches by me, sir. Deuce take them, fine. First-rate riding breeches they were too, blue with a check on it. They'd been ordered by a gentleman from the country, but he would not have them after all, said they were not full enough, so they were left on my hands. It struck me they were worth something. At the second-hand dealers I ought to get 5 silver rubles for them, or if not, I could turn them into 2 pairs of trousers for Petersburg gentlemen and have a piece over for a waistcoat for myself. Of course, for poor people like us everything comes in. And it happened just then that Emelianushka was having a sad time of it. There he sat day after day. He did not drink, not a drop passed his lips, but he sat and moped like an owl. It was sad to see him. He just sat and brooded. Well, thought I, either you've not got a copper to spend, my lad, or else you're turning over a new leaf of yourself. You've given it up. You've listened to reason. Well, sir, that's how it was with us. And just then came a holiday. I went to Vespers. When I came home, I found Emelianushka sitting in the window, drunk and rocking to and fro. "Ah, so that's what you've been up to, my lad." And I went to get something out of my chest, and when I looked in, the breeches were not there. I rummaged here and there. They'd vanished. When I'd ransacked everywhere and saw they were not there, something seemed to stab me to the heart. I ran first to the old dame and began accusing her. Of Emelianushka, I'd not the faintest suspicion, though there was cause for it in his sitting there drunk. "No," said the old body. "God be with you, my fine gentleman. What good are riding breeches to me? Am I going to wear such things? Why, a skirt I lost the other day through a fellow of your sort. I know nothing. I can tell you nothing about it, she said. Who has been here? Who has been in? I asked. Why, nobody has been, my good sir, says she. I've been here all the while. Emelyan Ilyitch went out and came back again. There he sits. Ask him. Emelyanushka, said I, have you taken those new riding breeches for anything? You remember the pair I made for that gentleman from the country? No, Astafy Ivanovitch, said he. I've not, touched them. I was in a state. I hunted high and low for them. They were nowhere to be found. And Emelyanushka sits there rocking himself to and fro. I was squatting on my heels facing him and bending over the chest, and all at once I stole a glance at him. Alack, I thought, my heart suddenly grew hot within me, and I felt myself flushing up too. And suddenly Emelyanushka looked at me. No, Astafy Ivanovitch, said he, those riding breeches of yours. Maybe, you are thinking. Maybe I took them, but I never touched them. But what can have become of them, Emelyan Ilyitch? No, Astafy Ivanovitch, said he, I've never seen them. Why, Emelyan Ilyitch, I suppose they've run off of themselves, eh? Maybe they have, Astafy Ivanovitch. When I heard him say that, I got up at once, went up to him, lighted the lamp and sat down to work to my sewing. I was altering a waistcoat for a clerk who lived below us. And wasn't there a burning pain and ache in my breast? I shouldn't have minded so much if I had put all the clothes I had in the fire. Emelyanushka seemed to have an inkling of what a rage I was in. When a man is guilty, you know, sir, he scents trouble far off, like the birds of the air before a storm. Do you know what, Astafy Ivanovitch? Emelyanushka began, and his poor old voice was shaking as he said the words. Antip Prohorich, the apothecary, married the coachman's wife this morning, who died the other day. I did give him a look, sir, a nasty look it was. Emelyanushka understood it too. I saw him get up, go to the bed, and begin to rummage there for something. I waited. He was busy there a long time and kept muttering all the while. No, not there. Where can the blessed things have got to? I waited to see what he'd do. I saw him creep under the bed on all fours. I couldn't bear it any longer. What are you crawling about under the bed for, Emelyan Ilyitch? Said I. Looking for the breeches, Astafy Ivanovitch. Maybe they've dropped down there somewhere. Why should you try to help a poor simple man like me, said I, crawling on your knees for nothing, sir? I called him that in my vexation. Oh, never mind, Astafy Ivanovitch, I'll just look. They'll turn up maybe somewhere. Said I. Look here, Emelyan Ilyitch. What is it, Astafy Ivanovitch? Said he. Haven't you simply stolen them from me like a thief and a robber, in return for the bread and salt you've eaten here? Said I. I felt so angry, sir, at seeing him fooling about on his knees before me. No, Astafy Ivanovitch. And he stayed lying, as he was on his face under the bed. A long time he lay there, and then at last crept out. I looked at him, and the man was as white as a sheet. He stood up, and sat down near me in the window, and sat so for some 10 minutes. No, Astafy Ivanovitch, he said, and all at once he stood up and came towards me, and I can see him now. He looked dreadful. No, Astafy Ivanovitch, said he, I never touched your breeches. He was all of a shake, poking himself in the chest with a trembling finger, and his poor old voice shook so that I was frightened, sir, and sat as though I was rooted to the window seat. Well, Emelyan Ilyitch, said I, as you will, forgive me if I, in my foolishness, have accused you unjustly. As for the breeches, let them go hang. We can live without them. We've still our hands, thank God. We need not go thieving or begging from some other poor man. We'll earn our bread. Emelyanushka heard me out, and went on standing there before me. I looked up, and he had sat down. And there he sat all the evening without stirring. At last, I lay down to sleep. Emelianushka went on sitting in the same place. When I looked out in the morning, he was lying curled up in his old coat on the bare floor. He felt too crushed, even to come to bed. Well, sir, I felt no more liking for the fellow from that day. In fact, for the first few days, I hated him. I felt, as one may say, as though my own son had robbed me and done me a deadly hurt. Ach, thought I, Emelianushka, Emelianushka. And Emelianushka, sir, went on drinking for a whole fortnight without stopping. He was drunk all the time, and regularly besotted. He went out in the morning and came back late at night, and for a whole fortnight I didn't get a word out of him. It was as though grief was gnawing at his heart, or as though he wanted to do for himself completely. At last he stopped. He must have come to the end of all he'd got, and then he sat in the window again. I remember he sat there without speaking for 3 days and 3 nights. All of a sudden I saw that he was crying. He was just sitting there, sir, and crying like anything, a perfect stream, as though he didn't know how his tears were flowing. And it's a sad thing, sir, to see a grown-up man, and an old man too, crying from woe and grief. "What's the matter, Emelianushka?" said I. He began to tremble so that he shook all over. I spoke to him for the first time since that evening. "Nothing, Astafy Ivanovitch." "God be with you, Emelianushka. What's lost is lost. Why are you moping about like this?" I felt sorry for him. "Oh, nothing, Astafy Ivanovitch, it's no matter. I want to find some work to do, Astafy Ivanovitch." "And what sort of work, pray, Emelianushka?" "Why, any sort. Perhaps I could find a situation such as I used to have. I've been all ready to ask Fedosey Ivanitch. I don't like to be a burden on you, Astafy Ivanovitch. If I can find a situation, Astafy Ivanovitch, then I'll pay it you all back and make you a return for all your hospitality." "Enough, Emelianushka, enough. Let bygones be bygones, and no more to be said about it. Let us go on as we used to do before." "No, Astafy Ivanovitch, you maybe think, but I never touched your riding breeches." "Well, have it your own way. God be with you, Emelianushka." "No, Astafy Ivanovitch, I can't go on living with you. That's clear. You must excuse me, Astafy Ivanovitch." "Why, God bless you, Emelian Ilyitch, who's offending you and driving you out of the place. Am I doing it?" "No. It's not the proper thing for me to live with you like this, Astafy Ivanovitch. I'd better be going." He was so hurt it seemed he stuck to his point. I looked at him, and sure enough, up he got and pulled his old coat over his shoulders. "But where are you going, Emelian Ilyitch? Listen to reason. What are you about? Where are you off to?" "No, goodbye, Astafy Ivanovitch, don't keep me now." And he was blubbering again. "I'd better be going. You're not the same now." "Not the same as what?" "I am the same. But you'll be lost by yourself like a poor helpless babe. Emelian Ilyitch." "No, Astafy Ivanovitch. When you go out now, you lock up your chest, and it makes me cry to see it, Astafy Ivanovitch. You'd better let me go, Astafy Ivanovitch, and forgive me all the trouble I've given you while I've been living with you." Well, sir, the man went away. I waited for a day. I expected he'd be back in the evening. No. Next day no sign of him, nor the third day either. I began to get frightened. I was so worried I couldn't drink, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. The fellow had quite disarmed me. On the 4th day I went out to look for him. I peeped into all the taverns, to inquire for him. But no, Emelianushka was lost. "Have you managed to keep yourself alive, Emelianushka?" I wondered. "Perhaps he is lying dead under some hedge, poor drunkard, like a sodden log." I went home more dead than alive. Next day I went out to look for him again, and I kept cursing myself that I'd been such a fool as to let the man go off by himself. On the 5th day, it was a holiday, in the early morning. I heard the door creak. I looked up, and there was my Emelianushka coming in. His face was blue, and his hair was covered with dirt, as though he'd been sleeping in the street. He was as thin as a match. He took off his old coat, sat down on the chest, and looked at me. I was delighted to see him, but I felt more upset about him than ever. For you see, sir, if I'd been overtaken in some sin, as true as I am here, sir, I'd have died like a dog before I'd have come back. But Emelianushka did come back, and a sad thing it was, sure enough, to see a man sunk so low. I began to look after him, to talk kindly to him, to comfort him. "Well, Emelianushka," said I am glad you've come back. Had you been away much longer, I should have gone to look for you in the taverns again today. Are you hungry?" "No, Astafy Ivanovitch." "Come now, aren't you really? Here, brother, is some cabbage soup left over from yesterday. There was meat in it. It is good stuff. And here is some bread and onion. Come, eat it. It'll do you no harm." I made him eat it, and I saw at once that the man had not tasted food for maybe 3 days. He was as hungry as a wolf. So it was hunger that had driven him to me. My heart was melted looking at the poor dear. Let me run to the tavern, thought I. I'll get something to ease his heart, and then we'll make an end of it. I've no more anger in my heart against you, Emelianushka. I brought him some vodka. Here, Emelian Ilyich, let us have a drink for the holiday. Like a drink, and it will do you good. He held out his hand, held it out greedily. He was just taking it, and then he stopped himself. But a minute after, I saw him take it and lift it to his mouth, spilling it on his sleeve. But though he got it to his lips, he set it down on the table again. "What is it, Emelianushka?" "Nothing, Astafy Ivanovitch, Won't you drink it?" "Well, Astafy Ivanovitch, I'm not, going to drink any more, Astafy Ivanovitch." "Do you mean you've given it up altogether, Emelianushka? Or are you only not going to drink today?" He did not answer. A minute later, I saw him rest his head on his hand. "What's the matter, Emelianushka? Are you ill?" "Why, yes, Astafy Ivanovitch. I don't feel well." I took him and laid him down on the bed. I saw that he really was ill. His head was burning hot, and he was shivering with fever. I sat by him all day. Towards night he was worse. I mixed him some oil and onion and kvass and bread broken up. "Come, eat some of this," said I, "and perhaps you'll be better." He shook his head. "No," said he, "I won't have any dinner today, Astafy Ivanovitch." I made some tea for him. I quite flustered our old woman. He was no better. Well, thinks I, it's a bad lookout. The third morning I went for a medical gentleman. There was one I knew living close by, Kostopravov by name. I'd made his acquaintance when I was in service with the Bozomyagins. He'd attended me. The doctor come and looked at him. "He's in a bad way," said he. "It was no use sending for me. But if you like, I can give him a powder." Well, I didn't give him a powder. I thought that's just the doctor's little game. And then the 5th day came. He lay, sir, dying before my eyes. I sat in the window with my work in my hands. The old woman was heating the stove. We were all silent. My heart was simply breaking over him, the good-for-nothing fellow. I felt as if it were a son of my own I was losing. I knew that Emelianushka was looking at me. I'd seen the man all the day long making up his mind to say something and not daring to. At last I looked up at him. I saw such misery in the poor fellow's eyes. He had kept them fixed on me. But when he saw that I was looking at him, he looked down at once. "Astafy Ivanovitch." "What is it, Emelianushka?" "If you were to take my old coat to a second-hand dealer's, how much do you think they'd give you for it, Astafy Ivanovitch?" There's no knowing how much they'd give. Maybe they would give me a ruble for it, Emelian Ilyich. But if I had taken it, they wouldn't have given a farthing for it, but would have laughed in my face for bringing such a trumpery thing. I simply said that to comfort the poor fellow, knowing the simpleton he was. But I was thinking, Astafy Ivanovitch, they might give you 3 rubles for it. It's made of cloth, Astafy Ivanovitch. How could they only give 1 ruble for a cloth coat? I don't know, Emelian Ilyich, said I. If you are thinking of taking it, you should certainly ask 3 rubles to begin with. Emelianushka was silent for a time, and then he addressed me again. Astafy Ivanovitch. What is it, Emelianushka? I asked. Sell my coat when I die, and don't bury me in it. I can lie as well without it, and it's a thing of some value. It might come in useful. I can't tell you how it made my heart ache to hear him. I saw that the death agony was coming on him. We were silent again for a bit. So, an hour passed by. I looked at him again. He was still staring at me, and when he met my eyes, he looked down again. Do you want some water to drink, Emelian Ilyich? I asked. Give me some, God bless you, Astafy Ivanovitch.
I gave him a drink.
Thank you, Astafy Ivanovitch, said he. Is there anything else you would like, Emelianushka? No, Astafy Ivanovitch, there's nothing I want, but I... sort of... What? I only... What is it, Emelianushka? Those riding breeches. It was... sort of... I who took them, Astafy Ivanovitch. Well, God forgive you, Emelianushka, said I. You poor, sorrowful creature. Depart in peace. And I was choking myself, sir, and the tears were in my eyes. I turned aside for a moment. Astafy Ivanovitch. I saw Emelianushka wanted to tell me something. He was trying to sit up, trying to speak and mumbling something. He flushed red all over suddenly, looked at me. Then I saw him turn white again, whiter and whiter, and he seemed to sink away all in a minute. His head fell back. He drew one breath and gave up his soul to God.
Fyodor Dostoevsky, Bobok, from Somebody's Diary, a short story about the afterlife. Semyon Ardalyonovich said to me all of a sudden the day before yesterday, "Why will you ever be sober, Ivan Ivanovich? Tell me that, pray." A strange requirement. I did not resent it. I am a timid man, but here they have actually made me out mad. An artist painted my portrait as it happened. After all, you are a literary man, he said. I submitted. He exhibited it. I read, "Go and look at that morbid face suggesting insanity." It may be so, but think of putting it so bluntly into print. In print, everything ought to be decorous. There ought to be ideals, while instead of that, say it indirectly at least. That's what you have style for. But no, he doesn't care to do it indirectly. Nowadays, humor and a fine style have disappeared, and abuse is accepted as wit. I do not resent it, but God knows I am not enough of a literary man to go out of my mind. I have written a novel. It has not been published. I have written articles. They have been refused. Those articles I took about from one editor to another. Everywhere they refused them. You have no salt, they told me. What sort of salt do you want? I asked with a jeer. Attic salt? They did not even understand. For the most part, I translate from the French for the booksellers. I write advertisements for shopkeepers too. Unique opportunity. Fine tea from our own plantations. I made a nice little sum over a panegyric on His deceased Excellency Pyotr Matveyich. I compiled the Art of Pleasing the Ladies, a commission from a bookseller. I've brought out some 6 little works of this kind in the course of my life. I am thinking of making a collection of the bon mots of Voltaire, but am afraid it may seem a little flat to our people. Voltaire's no good now. Nowadays, we want a cudgel, not Voltaire. We knock each other's last teeth out nowadays. Well, so that's the whole extent of my literary activity, though indeed I do send round letters to the editors gratis and fully signed. I give them all sorts of counsels and admonitions, criticize and point out the true path. The letter I sent last week to an editor's office was the 40th I had sent in the last 2 years. I have wasted 4 rubles over stamps alone for them. My temper is at the bottom of it all. I believe that the artist who painted me did so not for the sake of literature, but for the sake of 2 symmetrical warts on my forehead, a natural phenomenon, he would say. They have no ideas, so now they are out for phenomena. And didn't he succeed in getting my warts in his portrait, to the life? That is what they call realism. And as to madness, a great many people were put down as mad among us last year, and in such language, with such original talent, and yet, after all, it appears. However, one ought to have foreseen it long ago. That is rather artful, so that from the point of view of pure art, one may really commend it. Well, but after all, these so-called madmen have turned out cleverer than ever, so it seems the critics can call them mad, but they cannot produce anyone better. The wisest of all, in my opinion, is he who can, if only once a month, call himself a fool, a faculty unheard of nowadays. In old days, once a year at any rate, a fool would recognize that he was a fool, but nowadays not a bit of it. And they have so muddled things up that there is no telling a fool from a wise man. They have done that on purpose. I remember a witty Spaniard saying when 250 years ago the French built their first madhouses, "They have shut up all their fools in a house apart to make sure that they are wise men themselves." Just so. You don't show your own wisdom by shutting someone else in a madhouse. K has gone out of his mind means that we are sane now. No, it doesn't mean that yet. Hang it, though. Why am I maundering on? I go on grumbling and grumbling. Even my maidservant is sick of me. Yesterday a friend came to see me. "Your style is changing," he said. "It is choppy. You chop, and then a parenthesis in the parenthesis. Then you stick in something else in brackets. Then you begin chopping and chopping again." The friend is right. Something strange is happening to me. My character is changing and my head aches. I am beginning to see and hear strange things, not voices exactly, but as though someone beside me were muttering, "Bobok, Bobok, Bobok." What's the meaning of this Bobok? I must divert my mind. I went out in search of diversion. I hit upon a funeral, a distant relation, a collegiate counsellor, however, a widow and 5 daughters, all marriageable young ladies. What must it come to even to keep them in slippers? Their father managed it, but now there is only a little pension. They will have to eat humble pie. They have always received me ungraciously, and indeed I should not have gone to the funeral now had it not been for a peculiar circumstance. I followed the procession to the cemetery with the rest. They were stuck up and held aloof from me. My uniform was certainly rather shabby. It's 25 years, I believe, since I was at the cemetery. What a wretched place. To begin with the smell. There were 15 hearses, with palls varying in expensiveness. There were actually 2 catafalques. One was a general's, and one some ladies'. There were many mourners, a great deal of feigned mourning, and a great deal of open gaiety. The clergy have nothing to complain of. It brings them a good income. But the smell. The smell. I should not like to be one of the clergy here. I kept glancing at the faces of the dead cautiously, distrusting my impressionability. Some had a mild expression. Some looked unpleasant. As a rule, the smiles were disagreeable, and in some cases, very much so. I don't like them. They haunt one's dreams. During the service, I went out of the church into the air. It was a grey day, but dry. It was cold, too, but then it was October. I walked about among the tombs. They are of different grades. The third grade costs 30 rubles. It's decent and not so very dear. The first two grades are tombs in the church and under the porch. They cost a pretty penny. On this occasion, they were burying in tombs of the third grade 6 persons, among them the general and the lady. I looked into the graves, and it was horrible. Water and such water, absolutely green and— But there, why talk of it? The gravedigger was bailing it out every minute. I went out while the service was going on and strolled outside the gates. Close by was an almshouse, and a little further off there was a restaurant. It was not a bad little restaurant. There was lunch and everything. There were lots of the mourners here. I noticed a great deal of gaiety and genuine heartiness. I had something to eat and drink. Then I took part in the bearing of the coffin from the church to the grave. Why is it that corpses in their coffins are so heavy? They say it is due to some sort of inertia, that the body is no longer directed by its owner, or some nonsense of that sort, in opposition to the laws of mechanics and common sense. I don't like to hear people who have nothing but a general education venture to solve the problems that require special knowledge, and with us that's done continually. Civilians love to pass opinions about subjects that are the province of the soldier and even of the field marshal, while men who have been educated as engineers prefer discussing philosophy and political economy. I did not go to the requiem service. I have some pride, and if I am only received owing to some special necessity, why force myself on their dinners, even if it be a funeral dinner? The only thing I don't understand is why I stayed at the cemetery. I sat on a tombstone and sank into appropriate reflections. I began with the Moscow exhibition and ended with reflecting upon astonishment in the abstract. My deductions about astonishment were these. To be surprised at everything is stupid, of course, and to be astonished at nothing is a great deal more becoming and for some reason accepted as good form. But that is not really true. To my mind, to be astonished at nothing is much more stupid than to be astonished at everything. And moreover, to be astonished at nothing is almost the same as feeling respect for nothing. And indeed, a stupid man is incapable of feeling respect. But what I desire most of all is to feel respect. I thirst to feel respect, one of my acquaintances said to me the other day. He thirsts to feel respect. Goodness, I thought. What would happen to you if you dared to print that nowadays? At that point, I sank into forgetfulness. I don't like reading the epitaphs of tombstones. They are everlastingly the same. An unfinished sandwich was lying on the tombstone near me, stupid and inappropriate. I threw it on the ground, as it was not bread, but only a sandwich, though I believe it is not a sin to throw bread on the earth, but only on the floor. I must look it up in Souverin's calendar. I suppose I sat there a long time, too long a time, in fact. I must have lain down on a long stone which was of the shape of a marble coffin, and how it happened I don't know, but I began to hear things of all sorts being said. At first I did not pay attention to it, but treated it with contempt. But the conversation went on. I heard muffled sounds as though the speakers' mouths were covered with a pillow, and at the same time they were distinct and very near. I came to myself, sat up, and began listening attentively. Your Excellency, it's utterly impossible. You led hearts, I return your lead, and here you play the 7 of diamonds. You ought to have given me a hint about diamonds. What? Play by hard and fast rules? Where is the charm of that? You must, Your Excellency. One can't do anything without something to go upon. We must play with dummy, let one hand not be turned up. Well, you won't find a dummy here. What conceited words, and it was queer and unexpected. One was such a ponderous, dignified voice, the other softly suave. I should not have believed it if I had not heard it myself. I had not been to the requiem dinner, I believe, and yet how could they be playing preference here, and what general was this? That the sounds came from under the tombstones of that, there could be no doubt. I bent down and read on the tomb. Here lies the body of Major General Pervoyedov, a cavalier of such and such orders. Passed away in August of this year, 57. Rest, beloved ashes, till the joyful dawn. Dash it. It really is a general. There was no monument on the grave from which the obsequious voice came. There was only a tombstone. He must have been a fresh arrival. From his voice, he was a lower court councillor. Oh, ho, ho, ho! I heard in a new voice a dozen yards from the general's resting place, coming from quite a fresh grave. The voice belonged to a man and a plebeian, mawkish with its affectation of religious fervour. Oh, ho, ho, ho! Oh, here he is hiccuping again, cried the haughty and disdainful voice of an irritated lady, apparently of the highest society. It is an affliction to be by this shopkeeper. I didn't hiccup. Why, I've had nothing to eat. It's simply my nature. Really, madam, you don't seem able to get rid of your caprices here. Then why did you come and lie down here? They put me here. My wife and little children put me here. I did not lie down here of myself. The mystery of death. And I would not have lain down beside you, not for any money. I lie here as befitting my fortune, judging by the price. For we can always do that. Pay for a tomb of the 3rd grade. You made money, I suppose. You fleeced people? Fleece you, indeed. We haven't seen the colour of your money since January. There's a little bill against you at the shop. Well, that's really stupid. To try and recover debts here is too stupid to my thinking. Go to the surface. Ask my niece. She is my heiress. There's no asking anyone now, and no going anywhere. We have both reached our limit, and before the judgment seat of God are equal in our sins. In our sins, the lady mimicked him contemptuously. Don't dare to speak to me. Oh, ho, ho, ho! You see, the shopkeeper obeys the lady, your excellency. Why shouldn't he? Why, your excellency, because, as we all know, things are different here. Different? How? We are dead, so to speak, your excellency. Oh, yes, but still. Well, this is an entertainment. It is a fine show, I must say. If it has come to this down here, what can one expect on the surface? But what a queer business. I went on listening, however, though with extreme indignation. Yes, I should like a taste of life. Yes, you know, I should like a taste of life. I heard a new voice suddenly somewhere in the space between the general and the irritable lady. Do you hear, your excellency? Our friend is at the same game again. For 3 days at a time he says nothing, and then he bursts out with, I should like a taste of life, yes, a taste of life. And with such appetite, and such frivolity. It gets hold of him, your excellency, and do you know he is growing sleepy, quite sleepy. He has been here since April, and then all of a sudden, I should like a taste of life. It is rather dull, though, observed his excellency. It is, your excellency. Shall we tease Avdotia Ignatievna again, he? No, spare me, please. I can't endure that quarrelsome virago. And I can't endure either of you, cried the virago disdainfully. You are both of you bores, and can't tell me anything ideal. I know one little story about you, your excellency. Don't turn up your nose, please. How a man's servant swept you out from under a married couple's bed one morning. Nasty woman, the general muttered through his teeth. Avdotia Ignatievna, ma'am, the shopkeeper wailed suddenly again. My dear lady, don't be angry, but tell me, am I going through the ordeal by torment now, or is it something else? Ah, he is at it again, as I expected, for there's a smell from him which means he is turning round. I'm not turning round, ma'am, and there's no particular smell from me, for I've kept my body whole as it should be while you're regularly high, for the smell is really horrible even for a place like this. I don't speak of it, merely from politeness. Ah, you horrid, insulting wretch. He positively stinks and talks about me. Oh, ho, ho, ho. If only the time for my requiem would come quickly, I should hear their tearful voices over my head, my wife's lament and my children's soft weeping. Well, that's a thing to fret for. They'll stuff themselves with funeral rice and go home. Oh, I wish somebody would wake up. Avdotia Ignatievna, said the insinuating government clerk, Wait a bit, the new arrivals will speak. And are there any young people among them? Yes, there are. Avdotia Ignatievna. There are some not more than lads. Oh, how welcome that would be. Haven't they begun yet? Inquired His Excellency. Even those who came the day before yesterday haven't awakened yet, Your Excellency. As you know, they sometimes don't speak for a week. It's a good job that today and yesterday and the day before they brought a whole lot. As it is, they are all last year's for 70 feet round. Yes, it will be interesting. Yes, Your Excellency, they buried Tarasevich, the Privy Councillor, today. I knew it from the voices. I know his nephew. He helped to lower the coffin just now. Where is he then? 5 steps from you, Your Excellency, on the left, almost at your feet. You should make his acquaintance, Your Excellency. No. It's not for me to make advances. Oh, he will begin of himself, Your Excellency. He will be flattered. Leave it to me, Your Excellency, and I— Oh, what is happening to me? Croaked the frightened voice of a new arrival. A new arrival, Your Excellency. A new arrival, thank God. And how quick he's been. Sometimes they don't say a word for a week. Oh, I believe it's a young man, Avdotia Ignatievna cried shrilly. Aye, it was a complication, and so sudden, faltered the young man again. Only the evening before, Schultz said to me, there's a complication, and I died suddenly before morning. Oh. Well, there's no help for it, young man, the general observed graciously, evidently pleased at a new arrival. You must be comforted. You are kindly welcome to our Vale of Jehoshaphat, so to call it. We are kind-hearted people. You will come to know us and appreciate us. Major General Vasily Vasilich Pervoyedov at your service. Oh, no, certainly not. I was at Schultz's. I had a complication, you know. At first it was my chest and a cough, and then I caught a cold, my lungs and influenza, and all of a sudden, quite unexpectedly. The worst of all was its being so unexpected. You say it began with the chest, the government clerk put in suavely, as though he wished to reassure the new arrival. Yes, my chest and catarrh, and then no catarrh, but still the chest, and I couldn't breathe. And you know— I know, but if it was the chest, you ought to have gone to Ecker and not to Schultz. You know, I kept meaning to go to Botkin's, and all at once— Botkin is quite prohibitive, observed the general. Oh, no, he is not forbidding at all. I've heard he is so attentive and foretells everything beforehand. His Excellency was referring to his fees, the government clerk corrected him. Oh, not at all. He only asks 3 rubles, and he makes such an examination and gives you a prescription. And I was very anxious to see him, for I have been told— Well, gentlemen, had I better go to Ecker or to Botkin? What? To whom? The general's corpse shook with agreeable laughter. The government clerk echoed it in falsetto. Dear boy, dear delightful boy, how I love you! Avdotia Ignatievna squealed ecstatically. I wish they had put someone like you next to me. No, that was too much, and these were the dead of our times. Still, I ought to listen to more and not be in too great a hurry to draw conclusions. That snivelling new arrival— I remember him just now in his coffin— had the expression of a frightened chicken, the most revolting expression in the world. However, let us wait and see. But what happened next was such a bedlam that I could not keep it all in my memory. For a great many woke up at once. An official, a civil councillor, woke up and began discussing at once the project of a new subcommittee in a government department and of the probable transfer of various functionaries in connection with the subcommittee, which very greatly interested the general. I must confess I learnt a great deal that was new myself, so much so that I marvelled at the channels by which one may sometimes in the metropolis learn government news. Then an engineer half woke up, but for a long time muttered absolute nonsense, so that our friends left off worrying him and let him lie till he was ready. At last, the distinguished lady who had been buried in the morning under the catafalque showed symptoms of the reanimation of the tomb. Lebeziatnikov for the obsequious lower court councillor whom I detested, and who lay beside General Pervoyedov was called, it appears, Lebeziatnikov, became much excited, and surprised that they were all waking up so soon this time. I must own I was surprised too, though some of those who woke had been buried for 3 days, as, for instance, a very young girl of 16 who kept giggling in a horrible and predatory way. "Your Excellency, Privy Councillor Tarasevich is waking," Lebeziatnikov announced with extreme fussiness. "Eh? What?" The Privy Councillor, waking up suddenly, mumbled with a lisp of disgust. There was a note of ill-humoured peremptoriness in the sound of his voice. I listened with curiosity, for during the last few days I had heard something about Tarasevich, shocking and upsetting in the extreme. "It's I, Your Excellency. So far, only I." "What is your petition? What do you want?" "Merely to inquire after Your Excellency's health. In these unaccustomed surroundings, everyone feels at first, as it were, oppressed. General Pervoyedov wishes to have the honor of making Your Excellency's acquaintance, and hopes—" "I've never heard of him." "Surely, Your Excellency, General Pervoyedov Vasily Vasilich." "Are you General Pervoyedov?" "No, Your Excellency. I am only the lower court councillor Lebeziatnikov, at your service, but General Pervoyedov—" "Nonsense, and I beg you to leave me alone." "Let him be." General Pervoyedov at last himself checked with dignity the disgusting officiousness of his sycophant in the grave. "He is not fully awake, Your Excellency. You must consider that. It's the novelty of it all. When he is fully awake, he will take it differently." "Let him be," repeated the general. "Vasily Vasilich! Hey, Your Excellency!" A perfectly new voice shouted loudly and aggressively from close beside Avdotia Ignatievna. It was a voice of gentlemanly insolence, with the languid pronunciation now fashionable and an arrogant drawl. "I've been watching you all for the last 2 hours. Do you remember me, Vasily Vasilich? My name is Kleinvich. We met at the Volokonskys, where you too were received as a guest. I am sure I don't know why." "What, Count Pyotr Petrovitch? Can it be really you? And at such an early age? How sorry I am to hear it." "Oh, I am sorry myself, though I really don't mind, and I want to amuse myself as far as I can everywhere. And I am not a count, but a baron, only a baron. We are only a set of scurvy barons, risen from being flunkies, but why I don't know, and I don't care. I am only a scoundrel of the pseudo-aristocratic society, and I am regarded as a charming poly-son. My father is a wretched little general, and my mother was at one time received en haut lieu. With the help of the Jew Ziffel, I forged 50,000 rouble notes last year, and then I informed against him, while Julie Charpentier de Lusignan carried off the money to Bordeaux. And only fancy, I was engaged to be married, to a girl still at school, 3 months under 16, with a dowry of 90,000. Avdotia Ignatievna, do you remember how you seduced me 15 years ago when I was a boy of 14 in the Corps des Pages? Ah, that's you, you rascal. Well, you are a godsend anyway, for here. You were mistaken in suspecting your neighbor, the business gentleman, of unpleasant fragrance. I said nothing, but I laughed. The stench came from me. They had to bury me in a nailed-up coffin. Ugh, you horrid creature. Still, I am glad you are here. You can't imagine the lack of life and wit here. Quite so, and I intend to start here something original. Your Excellency. I don't mean you, Pervoyedov. Your Excellency the other one, Tarasevich, the Privy Councillor. Answer. I am Kleinovich, who took you to MLL. Fury in Lent, do you hear? I do, Kleinvich, and I am delighted, and trust me. I wouldn't trust you with a halfpenny, and I don't care. I simply want to kiss you, dear old man, but luckily I can't. Do you know, gentlemen, what this Grandpère's little game was? He died 3 or 4 days ago, and would you believe it, he left a deficit of 400,000 government money from the fund for widows and orphans. He was the sole person in control of it for some reason, so that his accounts were not audited for the last 8 years. I can fancy what long faces they all have now, and what they call him. It's a delectable thought, isn't it? I have been wondering for the last year how a wretched old man of 70, gouty and rheumatic, succeeded in preserving the physical energy for his debaucheries. And now the riddle is solved. Those widows and orphans, the very thought of them must have egged him on. I knew about it long ago. I was the only one who did know. It was Julie told me, and as soon as I discovered it, I attacked him in a friendly way at once in Easter week. Give me 25,000. If you don't, they'll look into your accounts tomorrow. And just fancy, he had only 13,000 left then, so it seems it was very apropos his dying now. Grand-père, grand-père, do you hear? Cher Klinovich, I quite agree with you, and there was no need for you to go into such details. Life is so full of suffering and torment, and so little to make up for it, that I wanted at last to be at rest, and so far as I can see, I hope to get all I can from here too. I bet that he has already sniffed Katisha Berestov. Who? What Katisha? There was a rapacious quiver in the old man's voice. What Katish? Why, here on the left, 5 paces from me and 10 from you. She has been here for 5 days, and if only you knew, grand-père, what a little wretch she is, of good family and breeding, and a monster, a regular monster. I did not introduce her to anyone there. I was the only one who knew her. Katicha, answer. Hey, the girl responded with a jangling laugh, in which there was a note of something as sharp as the prick of a needle. He. And a little blonde? The grand-père faltered, drawling out the syllables. He. I have long, the old man faltered breathlessly, cherished the dream of a little fair thing of 15, and just in such surroundings. Ah, the monster, cried Avdotya Ignatievna. Enough, Klinovich decided. I see there is excellent material. We shall soon arrange things better. The great thing is to spend the rest of our time cheerfully. But what time? Hey, you government clerk, Lebetsiatnikov, or whatever it is, I hear that's your name. Semyon Yevsych Lebetsiatnikov, lower court councillor, at your service. Very, very, very much delighted to meet you. I don't care whether you're delighted or not, but you seem to know everything here. Tell me first of all how it is we can talk. I've been wondering ever since yesterday. We are dead, and yet we are talking and seem to be moving, and yet we are not talking and not moving. What jugglery is this? If you want an explanation, Baron, Platon Nikolaevich could give you one better than I. What Platon Nikolaevich is that? To the point. Don't beat about the bush. Platon Nikolaevich is our homegrown philosopher, scientist, and master of arts. He has brought out several philosophical works, but for the last 3 months he has been getting quite drowsy, and there is no stirring him up now. Once a week he mutters something utterly irrelevant. To the point, to the point. He explains all this by the simplest fact, namely, that when we were living on the surface, we mistakenly thought that there was death. The body revives, as it were, here, the remains of life are concentrated, but only in consciousness. I don't know how to express it, but life goes on, as it were, by inertia. In his opinion, everything is concentrated somewhere in consciousness and goes on for 2 or 3 months, sometimes even for half a year. There is one here, for instance, who is almost completely decomposed, but once every 6 weeks he suddenly utters one word, quite senseless, of course, about some Bobok. Bobok, Bobok. But you see that an imperceptible speck of life is still warm within him. It's rather stupid. Well, and how is it I have no sense of smell, and yet I feel there's a stench? That. He. Well, on that point, our philosopher is a bit foggy. It's apropos of smell, he said, that the stench one perceives here is, so to speak, moral. Hey. It's the stench of the soul, he says, that in these 2 or 3 months it may have time to recover itself. And this is, so to speak, the last mercy. Only I think, Baron, that these are mystic ravings very excusable in his position. Enough. All the rest of it, I am sure, is nonsense. The great thing is that we have 2 or 3 months more of life, and then— Bobok. I propose to spend these 2 months as agreeably as possible, and so to arrange everything on a new basis. Gentlemen, I propose to cast aside all shame. Ah, let us cast aside all shame. Let us. Many voices could be heard saying, and strange to say, several new voices were audible, which must have belonged to others newly awakened. The engineer, now fully awake, boomed out his agreement with peculiar delight. The girl Katisha giggled gleefully. "Oh, how I long to cast off all shame!" Avdotia Ignatievna exclaimed rapturously. "I say, if Avdotia Ignatievna wants to cast off all shame—" "No, no, no, Kleinovitch, I was ashamed up there all the same. But here I should like to cast off shame. I should like it awfully." "I understand, Kleinovitch," boomed the engineer, "that you want to rearrange life here on new and rational principles." "Oh, I don't care a hang about that. For that, we'll wait for Kudiarov, who was brought here yesterday. When he wakes, he'll tell you all about it. He is such a personality, such a titanic personality. Tomorrow they'll bring along another natural scientist, I believe, an officer for certain, and 3 or 4 days later, a journalist, and I believe his editor with him. But deuce take them all. There will be a little group of us anyway, and things will arrange themselves. Though meanwhile, I don't want us to be telling lies. That's all I care about, for that is one thing that matters. One cannot exist on the surface without lying, for life and lying are synonymous. But here we will amuse ourselves by not lying. Hang it all, the grave has some value after all. We'll all tell our stories aloud, and we won't be ashamed of anything. First of all, I'll tell you about myself. I am one of the predatory kind, you know, all that was bound and held in check by rotten cords up there on the surface. Away with cords, and let us spend these 2 months in shameless truthfulness. Let us strip and be naked. "Let us be naked! Let us be naked!" cried all the voices. "I long to be naked. I long to be," Avdotia Ignatievna shrilled. Ah, I see we shall have fun here. I don't want Eka after all. No, I tell you, give me a taste of life. "Hey, hey, hey," giggled Katisha. "The great thing is that no one can interfere with us, and though I see Pervoyedov is in a temper, he can't reach me with his hand. Grand-père, do you agree?" "I fully agree, fully, and with the utmost satisfaction, but on condition that Katish is the first to give us her biography." "I protest! I protest with all my heart!" General Pervoyedov brought out firmly. "Your Excellency," the scoundrel Lebeziatnikov persuaded him in a murmur of fussy excitement. "Your Excellency, it will be to our advantage to agree. Here, you see, there's this girl's, and all their little affairs. There's the girl, it's true, but— It's to our advantage, Your Excellency. Upon my word it is. If only as an experiment, let us try it. Even in the grave, they won't let us rest in peace. In the first place, General, you were playing preference in the grave, and in the second, we don't care a hang about you," drawled Kleinovitch. "Sir, I beg you not to forget yourself." "What? Why, you can't get at me, and I can tease you from here as though you were Julie's lapdog. And another thing, gentlemen, how is he a general here? He was a general there, but here is mere refuse. No, not mere refuse, even here. Here you will rot in the grave, and 6 brass buttons will be all that will be left of you." "Bravo, Kleinovitch! Ha, ha, ha!" roared voices. "I have served my sovereign. I have the sword." "Your sword is only fit to prick mice, and you never drew it even for that." "That makes no difference. I formed a part of the whole. There are all sorts of parts in a whole. Bravo, Kleinovitch, bravo, ha, ha, ha." "I don't understand what the sword stands for," boomed the engineer. "We shall run away from the Prussians like mice. They'll crush us to powder," cried a voice in the distance that was unfamiliar to me, that was positively spluttering with glee. "The sword, sir, is an honor," the general cried, but only I heard him. There arose a prolonged and furious roar, clamor, and hubbub, and only the hysterically impatient squeals of Avdotia Ignatievna were audible. "But do let us make haste! Ah, when are we going to begin to cast off all shame?" "Oh, ho, ho! The soul does in truth pass through torments," exclaimed the voice of the plebeian, and here I suddenly sneezed. It happened suddenly and unintentionally, but the effect was striking. All became as silent as one expects it to be in a churchyard. It all vanished like a dream. A real silence of the tomb set in. I don't believe they were ashamed on account of my presence. They had made up their minds to cast off all shame. I waited 5 minutes. Not a word, not a sound. It cannot be supposed that they were afraid of my informing the police. For what could the police do to them? I must conclude that they had some secret unknown to the living, which they carefully concealed from every mortal. "Well, my dears," I thought, "I shall visit you again." And with those words, I left the cemetery. No, that I cannot admit. No, I really cannot. The Bobok case does not trouble me, so that is what that Bobok signified. Depravity in such a place, depravity of the last aspirations, depravity of sodden and rotten corpses, and not even sparing the last moments of consciousness. Those moments have been granted, vouchsafed to them, and worst of all, in such a place. No, that I cannot admit. I shall go to other tombs. I shall listen everywhere. Certainly one ought to listen everywhere, and not merely at one spot in order to form an idea. Perhaps one may come across something reassuring, but I shall certainly go back to those. They promise their biographies and anecdotes of all sorts. Tfu! But I shall go. I shall certainly go. It is a question of conscience. I shall take it to the Citizen. The editor there has had his portrait exhibited too. Maybe he will print it.